It's been said that if you stop being curious, you stop growing. From the way the world works, to talking to interesting people, to things that go bump in the night. I'm David Wylie, and I've got questions. This is Dave Wants to Know. Let's dive in. Oh, hi, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of Dave Wants to Know. I am your host, David Wylie. You know, when I was in journalism school, one of the first things they taught you was the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why, and sometimes how. Those are the very first things they teach you. That's what they teach you to get the story. Those are the 5 things you need to know. But somehow when I was growing up, the word that stuck with me was why. And that got me in a lot of trouble. Why do I have to listen to you? Why do I have to do my homework? Why do I have to be home by a certain time? Why? That was a bit of a problem for me. But there was also a positive side to the why questions. What's around the corner of the trail, or what's on the other side of the mountain? Yeah, those are what questions, but they're part of the 5 W's. So go with me on this. And that started that curiosity. When I was a young kid, I had a Radio Shack cassette player and recorder. Got to have the recorder, record songs off the radio. And then I began wanting to be a DJ and being my own guy, or interviewing my friends. I'd do man on the street interviews with, hey, are you roller skating, or are you skateboarding? How do you set up a firecracker? Yeah, we had a lot of fun back then, and we play it back and we just laugh at ourselves. But I always had that question of why. And why, along with the sense of awe, I think can go together. Like I said, I had the negative whys early on, especially toward authority figures or school. But I also had a sense of awe. And I remember as a young kid, my parents waking me up to see the moon landing in 1969. And I remember thinking, that's pretty cool. That is really cool. But the sense of awe that I talk about, the sense of awe that many of us had as a child, some of you maybe your first trip to Disneyland, or the first time you saw Santa Claus. Those were, defining moments, a sense of awe. For me, what was really weird is I received a 45 record of the moon landing, and it was kind of a narration of the story told by famous journalist Hugh Downs. I remember Hugh Downs from ABC News. I think he used to be on with Barbara Walters as well. Anyways, on this record, there were 2 sides, and one was kind of what led up to the moon landing. And it included this famous moonshot speech from JFK in 1962.
But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
I always loved that. I memorized that portion of that speech, and I love the passion he had for that. And just, we are going for it, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And then the other side focused more on the moon landing itself, that mission. And it included one of the most iconic phrases of all time.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
From there, my sense of why continued. I loved the radio from the very beginning. I would even take apart radios to try to figure out how they worked. I didn't always get that, but I tried anyways. I think Pastor Rick Warren kind of answered the why in a sense in his famous book, Purpose Driven Life, where the opening line is, "It's not about you. So why am I here? Why did God put me on this earth? Why am I experiencing troubles? Those were a lot of whys that I asked as a kid. And as a Christian, I still have many questions of why. Um, but I believe, I believe in Christ and that He's my Savior. But there's still questions of why and mysteries. Back to my childhood. So the moon landing, that famous 45 record with Hugh Downs kind of prompted that. And then many of you might remember a show in the 70s called In Search of. It was hosted by Leonard Nimoy, and they would search for different types of mysteries. And I remember, the Loch Ness Monster and being drawn in by that. And I think Noah's Ark. And then there was Bigfoot. And they showed that famous Patterson and Gimlin film that so many of us seen with the hairy creature walking through the forest and turning that iconic turn. And I was fascinated by that and terrified at the same time. Is there really creatures like that out in the woods? Are there Bigfoots in our local mountains in my neighborhood? That's a question that I'm actually still trying to answer, and hopefully we'll address a little bit on this show. But I think in a bigger scale, Bigfoot kind of almost represents a question mark of what's out there. We don't really know. You could be on either side on that one, but there's tons of different mysteries and controversies that we ask why or or what is that? Is there something more to it? So that led to a 28-year career in journalism, both on the radio and in television. And that was prompted because I wanted to know why. Why are things happening this way? What happened? What's going on over there? That curiosity was always with me. And that career came to kind of an abrupt end a few years back. I kind of had to refocus my thought process, but the why question was always there. It always was in the back of my mind. And when I turned 60 a few years ago, I felt like I needed some more answers. I was thirsting for information, for wisdom, and I got into the Bible more and reading more of that. Then I just started reading general books, whether it was about Genghis Khan or Abraham Lincoln or the Donner Party or string theory, self-help books, of course, Bigfoot books, just reading all of that, just a thirst for knowledge. And I don't know why this happened. So I've been reading books. In fact, that was a New Year's resolution for me a couple of years ago. Read a book a month. I was never a big book reader, not very good at school back in the day. But I said, let's set a goal, one book a month. The first year, I think I read 18 or 19 books. Last year, I think I read 25 books. So I'm way ahead of schedule. I still feel like I've barely even scratched the surface. So that why itch is being scratched a little bit by reading books and things like that. And you can go down the rabbit hole on YouTube as well. But that's part of what this podcast is about, is to kind of look at some whys, see if we can explain them or at least better understand them. Also talk to some interesting people. Everyone has a story. I know that's a little bit of a cliche, but it's totally true. And people that you think are one thing or have success in one area, you may find out that they have a much bigger story to tell. And that's something else I want to do in this podcast, is talk to interesting people, find out how did they get to where they are, success tips, um, what is their whole story? Because a lot of times there's pain and hardship behind those stories, and we all experience that. And when you see someone who's been successful or has accomplished something and you see what it took for them to get there, that helps answer a lot of questions, whether it's a why or a how that is in your inside yourself. Now, yes, we will talk about Bigfoot. I love Bigfoot. You can see the little Bigfoot behind me here. And I'm not here to convince anybody whether Bigfoot is real or not. But the question is so intriguing. Could there be a creature out there that has been undiscovered. And this applies to a lot of different things. Like I said before, it's kind of a question mark of life. What are the mysteries out there that we're missing? Bigfoot lives in that maybe space. And I think we kind of need those spaces now. We don't need to have black and white answers to everything to make life interesting and to make life profound. And that's kind of where faith comes in. I am a Christian, as I said earlier, a deeply flawed Christian, but a Christian nonetheless. And within the Bible, there are so many mysteries, from the giants and Leviathan of the Old Testament, the burning bush, a boat that carried animals during a giant flood, to Christ himself, some of the things he did. What did he write in the dirt? What were some of his proverbs? What did they mean? There is so much mystery in the Bible, and yet we accept the teachings on faith, but it's still fun to explore some of those mysteries, and that's something else we'll be looking at. Somewhere along the way, I think we got this idea that we have to have all the answers, that we have to have a take, that just Google it and find out. Some of the best conversations ever start with, I was wondering why, or why do you think this? It's an open ended question that leads to opinions, to speculation, to maybe some educated answers, but not always. I think getting older has changed my perspective a lot. I think it's important that we listen and that we learn and ask why. I think curiosity doesn't make you younger, but it makes you less rigid. And that's a good thing as you get older, because I, for one, do not want to be one of those older people who are stuck in their ways and stuck in the way they think. I want to be open to those ideas and theories and keep asking those questions why. So, what's the show about? What's the podcast about? Well, some episodes might be short reflections, kind of like this one. Other times we might talk about faith or music or woodworking or Bigfoot. I've got some great guests lined up coming up talking about things about entertainment and the loss of a child and interesting things that can affect every one of us in one way or another. Sometimes we'll talk to interesting people. Sometimes we'll talk about interesting topics. Sometimes they will overlap. And that's kind of the point. If you're here going, yeah, I wonder about things. I wonder how things work, or why this is, or this mystery over here. Is there answers, or is there another way of looking at things? I think you're in the right place if that's you. The podcast is called Dave Wants to Know, but it's actually for all of us. It's for you, the viewer or listener, to learn new things and to be part of asking these questions. And I want to hear back from you. I want to hear what questions you have. What do you think of some of the topics and guests that we have on our show? I want to thank you for wandering into this kind of maybe space with me today. Keep your eyes open, your heart humble, and never stop asking why. I'm glad you're here, and let's see where this goes.